Thanks again for making time in your busy schedules to join us today for another CII webinar. We will have an opportunity to take questions at the very end of the webinar. So if during the webinar you have a question, feel free to use the tool on your control panel there. You'll see a box that has a question panel, and if you expand that, it'll give you the opportunity to type in a question and our panelists can respond at the tail end. I would also like to remind you that it is that time of year, the holidays are upon us, and I'd like to offer a safety moment about electrical safety and time to be a good example for our neighbors and our families. And given that electrical hazards cause more than 300 deaths a year, it's about 4,000 injuries a year, it's pretty important that we pay attention to these safety precautions. Always use an extension cord that's rated for outdoor use. Prevent tripping hazards. Use anchoring pins or ground staples to secure extension cords to the ground or the side of the walkway. Keep your cords out of water. It can be hard for a lot of us during the holidays. It's wet across most of our regions, so try to keep those cords safe away from water or metal objects. And finally, avoid putting extension cords under rugs or doors or through windows where they might be pinched, could become worn or create a tripping hazard. So with that, we'll go ahead and kick into our webinar here that is coming to you by Valency. They are a CII member and a longtime CII registered education provider. Their mission is to make capital projects a source of excitement and growth, not anxiety and risk. And they do this by providing their clients with implementation support and training of best practices from CII that dramatically improve the performance of capital projects. So today we're happy to present to you our panelists and our facilitator. Sandra McGilvery is the managing director for Valency. She leads Valency's team of advisors, facilitators, and course developers. She has served CII on research teams related to PDRI, front-end planning, risk management, a lot here, and portfolio management. She brings a wealth of experience in facilitating challenging workshops throughout the capital project's life cycle. So we're happy to have Sandra here as our host and facilitator. And then we also have 3 CII members on our panel today. Ruth Sands with the Capital Center of Excellence, leader for Engineering Technology Center with DuPont. Sean Dondy is the Manager of Business Process and Continuous Improvement with Matrix Service. And Jason Hetherington is the Director of Global Capital Project Management with ADM. So with that, let's get started on our topic. Sandra, the importance of facilitation skills in capital projects workshops.
Thank you very much, Jenny. Well, to kick off today's webinar, we'd like to start with an important CII research finding. Strong project team leadership, team alignment drives predictable project outcomes. We also know that establishing and maintaining strong team alignment requires a commitment to a project culture that fosters effective leadership, communication, and trust. And part of building this type of culture is a foundational skill set, facilitation. The challenge that many of our organizations face is that facilitation skills are often overlooked. Our procedures don't always clearly identify those meetings and workshops that would be best conducted using a facilitative approach. And let's face it, facilitating a collaborative decision-making process is complicated. Let's take a quick poll. How frequently do you leave a collaborative workshop or meeting feeling frustrated that nothing was really accomplished? Maybe there was a lot of great discussion, but people kept going off on tangents. Sometimes there's just too many ideas proposed and it's impossible to focus.
And if you're having any issues utilizing the poll, it works best if you are not using your full screen. So if your screen is maximized, you might have some issues participating, but if you minimize that screen, it should work just fine. It looks like we're still collecting responses here. If you give it one moment, we'll go ahead and close this out.
Thank you, Jenny. Did you see I didn't see the responses there, Jenny,
Looks
but
like
perhaps you can share with us.
54% have agreed that sometimes, depends on the project, followed by 31% with frequently, most projects.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think that the good news is that hopefully the topic that we present here today, it'll resonate to some degree with at least some workshops where you've seen this challenge come up before. So let's just touch base on our webinar objectives. Over the course of this webinar, we want to answer this question: how can we help build facilitation capacity and improve team alignment in our projects? We'll start by walking through the dynamics of group decision-making. And next, we'll share the role of a facilitator in group decision-making processes. Many CII best practices rely on collaborative workshops and group decision-making, and we'll share some of the most common workshops and meetings that should be led by a facilitator. Next, we'll briefly introduce core facilitation practices and techniques with examples of how they're applied. We'll then transition to hear from our panel of industry leaders and their insights related to facilitation. And finally, we'll review practical steps you can take to build facilitation skills with your project leaders and your facilitators. The reality of group decision-making is that it's not a straight line from idea generation to decision. Most people you engage will bring forward ideas, sometimes lots of them. Not all ideas are well communicated or fully understood by the group, and not everybody processes the discussion at the same speed. So how do we move from idea generation to decision? This next diagram is a much better representation of how group decision-making really works when we have a difficult problem to solve, and our industry has no shortage of those. When discussion begins, people generally start by sharing safe ideas and those familiar options. And if we avoid the temptation to wrap up the discussion too quickly, the group may start to explore a wider range of possibilities. And if people feel safe, they might even take a risk and share a partially developed or a controversial idea. We call this the divergent thinking zone. Once we cross the line from those safe ideas and consider a more diverse group of perspectives, we're forced to try and understand a wide range of new and sometimes even opposing ideas. It makes most of us uncomfortable. The reality is that misunderstandings and miscommunication are a normal part of group decision-making, and we call this the groan zone. Seeking clarification where there are misunderstandings and starting the group to categorize ideas and identify common themes helps build the foundation for a shared understanding and meaningful collaboration. The other side of this is the convergent thinking zone. Here, workable ideas begin to take shape, and once the group has a framework to evaluate and prioritize those alternatives, the pace of discussion starts to accelerate. Confidence builds, and the group gains alignment and reaches a decision. Group decision-making is complex, but with the support of skilled facilitators, it's one of the most effective ways to maintain strong team alignment throughout the life cycle of a project. Next, let's unpack the role of a facilitator. The mission of a facilitator is to enable a group to reach a conclusion that they would have difficulty reaching on their own. From our earlier poll, most of the participants today have some firsthand examples of workshops or meetings where it was challenging for the group to reach a conclusion. And by having a facilitator lead that type of a workshop, they help you take steps to encourage participation from everyone. They help the group reach a mutual understanding of one another's needs and objectives, and they create a safe and inclusive environment where everyone can share their wisdom and perspective. And finally, they cultivate a sense of shared responsibility and buy-in on that final decision that's made by the team. Facilitated workshops and meetings are an integral part of so many CII best practices. Today's panelists will share additional examples of key workshops and meetings where their organizations also leverage skilled facilitators. There are many challenges that facilitators face. There's a potential for pre-existing conflict between stakeholders to emerge during your discussions. Group decision-making by nature means that people come to the table with different and often competing priorities. Complicated group dynamics can emerge, especially when we hit that groan zone. And it takes time for everyone to have the space to explain and understand all of the perspectives. And of course, we have different personalities that'll be participating to consider. Let's transition next to talk about some of the core facilitation skills that are needed to facilitate a collaborative workshop that's common to many CII best practices. There's 3 principles that I'd like to introduce here today. The first is around neutrality. A facilitator should always be neutral on the content of the workshop or the meeting. With most CII practices, this means the facilitator shouldn't be a team member. A common question from project managers is, when is it appropriate to facilitate my own meetings and workshops? And the answer is really to take a look at that content. As an example, if you're selecting a facilitator to lead a design review, the project manager may be well suited if they're confident they can remain neutral on the content. However, if the project manager was previously an engineer with a lot of expertise in that area, it may be much more difficult to resist sharing their experience and imposing their perspective. The next concept is around creating participation and effective group decision making. And this relies on being able to engage our stakeholders. This starts with creating a safe environment where everyone in the group is encouraged and feels comfortable to share their perspectives. How we create participation depends on the size of the group, whether the group's meeting in person or virtually. You want to think about the current zone that you're in the decision-making process as well. And the third principle is promoting active listening. Active listening means giving your complete focus and attention to the speaker to understand what they're communicating and being able to respond in a thoughtful manner to help improve that mutual understanding. There are many techniques that facilitators can master, but let's just touch on a few that are used in almost every well-facilitated meeting. The first is clarifying. Often people, as they speak, they have ideas that are not always fully formed. And if your group doesn't fully understand the speaker's point, ideally, they would start asking questions or clarifying questions. If they don't, you may have to kickstart the process and help draw the speaker out to clarify or elaborate on their points with questions like, tell me more about that, or what would be an example, or are you saying? There's easy ways to get that going. The next one that we have is managing perspectives. And when you notice that a conversation is going in different directions, it's important to acknowledge that people have brought forth several different perspectives or issues. And you can help the group by pausing to identify all those different perspectives and put them on a visible list for your group. This will allow your group to work through each of those perspectives, engaging people, encouraging questions to improve that mutual understanding. Summarizing is a great technique to get a discussion back on track, bring multiple relevant ideas together, or to bring the discussion to a close. It helps your group consolidate their thinking by restating some key themes, the main points that have been made, and a good summary will conclude with a question to help gracefully transition, such as, is there anything else we'd like to capture before we move to the next topic on the agenda? Finally, let's touch on some meeting management considerations that are unique to facilitated meetings. Keep in mind, this is a meeting where we're trying to help a group reach a conclusion they would have difficulty reaching on their own. First one I want to talk to is planning. And any well-planned meeting will have an agenda, but a facilitated meeting takes much more planning time and effort. And it's important to start with a clear understanding of the meeting goals. From there, the facilitator must consider the stakeholders that need to be engaged, the complexity of the topic, and the issues at hand. And this will help them develop an effective facilitation strategy to achieve those meeting goals in a reasonable amount of time. The second consideration is that a facilitator is responsible for keeping the discussion on topic. This means making sure we start the meeting on time, helping your team stick to the agenda, bringing the group back to the main discussion if they go too deep into the details, and helping to bring closure to each topic on the agenda. The third consideration is that a facilitated meeting should always start with clear rules of engagement or guidelines. If a discussion starts to derail, Facilitators refer back to these rules of engagement to tactfully help everybody stay within the guidelines and maintain a positive group dynamic. Now that we've walked through several of those core skills to facilitate collaborative workshops and meetings, let's transition to hear from our panel of industry leaders who've put this into practice. Our first panelist is Ruth Sands from DuPont. All right. Well, it's my pleasure to introduce Ruth Sands, Capital Center of Excellence leader at DuPont. Ruth, thank you for joining us today on the panel.
Oh, thank you for the opportunity.
I'm wondering if you might start us off with sharing a little bit of background on DuPont's Capital Center of Excellence and what your role is all about.
Well, I lead a small team that maintains and improves the best practices associated with capital execution. So our team is determining the best practices for execution and for governance of capital projects. We also maintain systems and tools associated with executing capital projects, and then benchmarking and metrics, along with project controls best practices. So we're supporting the business units in their execution of capital and determining minimal essential, but also in general best practices.
All right, very good. Well, I guess the first question for our audience to share some input would be if you could tell us a little bit about maybe periods in your career where you've learned the most about facilitation.
Yes, I've had the good fortune to have a lot of experience. And so people often say, how do you become a good facilitator? And I think it just takes a lot of practice. So I had the opportunities in previous roles. DuPont had a really great process that was a brainstorming, diverging, converging process for hard to solve problems. And that was through our central engineering group. And so I was able to learn how to do facilitation mostly through that experience, and um, had the opportunity to co-facilitate and learn how to do it, and then go out and be a facilitator for that. A couple of the other types of things that I got into were conflictive situations, or things where it was controversial. And so when you had people that really wanted to get alignment on a new path, where it was there was some controversy associated with that, I got to have the opportunity to do several of those. So I personally have gotten exposed to lots of different types of meetings, and the need to facilitate different types, and the skills needed are a little bit different in each kind.
It's really interesting that you had kind of this almost like this experiential and mentorship of co-facilitator to facilitator. So that's a really great model. How about if you look a little broader at kind of your center of excellence and the best practices you have today? Where do you see kind of those facilitation skills being the most important?
They are really important. One of the most important places, I think, is in the business engineering alignment meetings. So those, I think it's really important to have a neutral facilitator, and to have someone that can get not a super large group, but a fairly large group aligned, in an efficient amount of time. So that often takes someone outside of the business that can really be an appropriate person to um, test and push for answers, rather than just kind of accepting maybe the first answer from a group. So I think those are really important. We also are doing PDRIs in DuPont, and also value engineering. So we have lots of opportunities for facilitation within the capital execution space for sure.
Excellent. And how about, can you share some of the strategies that you're using today in kind of a global organization, in a very virtual or maybe hybrid environment? What's working well to help build that facilitation capacity for you?
Well, we have tried to expand the base, as we have a lot of new people coming in. DuPont's changed a lot over the last 5 to 10 years. And so we found that we didn't have many people left that had, firsthand experience doing value engineering, and for instance. So we took a pretty broad look at what we wanted to do and just decided to train a new and upcoming, group of facilitators that we could use cross regionally, across regions, and then also across business units. So we took the tack to actually go out and pick 15 to 20 people and train them and create a new pool. And we also, have just started experientially as well. We had a few people who were doing PDRIs and other types of meetings and building on their skills. So those people that were, had a little bit of experience using those for the more difficult things like a beam. I think a business engineering alignment meeting is a little more difficult than some of the other topics. So trying to use the experience that we have and then also build the next generation of facilitators.
Right, very good. And kind of any other kind of words of advice that you'd really like to share with our webinar participants here today?
Well, I think you have to get out and do it. And so we've noticed that that's probably one of the biggest um, barriers for people is so we created our internal facilitation course with Valency to train people on basic skills. But they really need to get out there and do it. And so pairing people up with an experienced facilitator is a really good tactic. So being able to observe someone else, and then also coming back as a group. So we're having, group touch points quarterly to help share experiences. So trying to bring that group along in that way. So really trying to manage the pool and provide opportunities to facilitate, and then also provide the structure as well. So making sure that the meetings that they're going to be doing have a good structure around them. So that takes a lot of the pressure off and allows the people to focus on the group and the skills that it takes to facilitate the meeting rather than on not the what am I doing, but the how am I doing it. So I would say the other thing that's helpful is if the people are flexible. So I'd say the ultimate skill of a facilitator is to be able to flex to whatever the group needs, and that doesn't describe everyone. So I think if you have a situation that can be quite fluid, you need to find someone that's really comfortable being flexible and changing directions. So having a friend, having a co-facilitator is really helpful for a lot of meetings, so that that person can be the timekeeper and kind of gauging, when does an intervention needed. So co-facilitation is really helpful.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Ruth, and we'll look forward
Sure.
to having you join us for questions later.
Absolutely.
What a rich discussion with Ruth. A few of her points that really hit home for me: get out and do it. It's the biggest barrier for a lot of new facilitators, but practice is how we all learn the most. The other was efficient use of time. Facilitators are key to helping teams efficiently work through conflicted, controversial, and hard to solve problems. And how about our words on flexibility? Great facilitators need the ability to flex, and if the situation warrants, change direction or call a timeout. We're going to circle back to Ruth's recommendations for building facilitation capacity after all of our panel discussions as well. Our next panelist is Sean Dante from Matrix Service. Well, it's my pleasure to introduce Sean Dante, Manager of Business Process and Continuous Improvement with Matrix Service. Sean, perhaps you could start us off with a bit of background about Matrix Service and your role with the organization.
Sure, thanks, Sandra. So again, yeah, my name is Sean Dante. I've been with Matrix Service for going on 10 years this coming year. And Matrix Service is predominantly in the industrial construction sector. We're headquarters in Tulsa, Oklahoma. We have 3 subsidiary companies: Matrix Service Incorporated, which is our non-union construction. We have Matrix PDM, which is our engineering arm. And then we have Matrix North America, otherwise known as MNAC, which is our union side. Within
Excellent.
MSI, which is where I sit, we're mostly in storage solutions, LNG, cryogenic facilities, vacuum chambers, thermal vacuum chambers. So that's a large portion of our services, along with maintenance and repair of tanks and turnaround plant services.
Okay, excellent. Well, the first question we have for you for our webinar here today is to ask you to share a little bit about some of the periods in your career where you feel like you've learned the most about facilitation.
Well, I think it's kind of, for me, it started with, some of that formal training and just listening to just kind of the academic side about what it is to facilitate, just the dynamics with, personalities and how you deal with groups of people coming from different perspectives. Yeah, I mean, it started with that for sure, but I'd say I probably learned more from actually getting into the weeds of actually doing facilitating. It's kind of one of those skills that I think, as much as you can learn about it, you really need to grow that skill through practice. And so just kind of, not being scared to jump into facilitating, knowing that you may not be the expert at the time, but that each time you facilitate one of those kinds of sessions, there's little lessons learned, and you get more confidence and understand dynamics and dealing with people, particularly when you're in a company where you're dealing with the same people all the time.
And did you kind of have some fairly safe or low risk, kind of meetings or workshops that you started with?
I'd like to say there was, but that's not that's not really how it started for us. We was really jumping right into PDRIs, which I'd say so far
Okay.
PDRIs are probably the most difficult one to do, simply because of kind of the subjectivity of the information and how people can interpret, where they think they're at scope definition wise. And maybe that was better for me in the end, because it forced me to kind of jump right into the deep end and have to learn how to, to deal with, how everyone was coming to the table with those different perspectives.
Okay, excellent. Well, the second question that I have for you is, when you look at how Matrix Service uses facilitators, do you see specific meetings or workshops where they become essential to your organization?
Ours are really centered around, those CII tools. So we do PDRIs, Project Definition Rating Index. We do construction readiness assessments. Those are the first two big ones that we really implemented as part of our overall kind of phase gate assessment approach to project execution. And so we've spent a lot of time doing those. We've recently started kind of adding to that a little bit with some commissioning kind of style reviews. Those ones in particular, the PDRI and the construction readiness, I mean, they're pretty important and essential to needing a facilitator, just by the nature of the people that are in that review and their kind of predisposition to want to present answers that reflect progress in a good light. So yeah, being able to identify that as a neutral facilitator is pretty important, because otherwise, you'd let too much bias come into the process, and I think your end result isn't going to be as valuable as it could be, just because it may not be as accurate as it is.
Well said, Sean. So the final question that I have for you is, when you think about those that are attending the webinar today, are there some strategies that have proven to be pretty successful at helping to onboard or build facilitation skills across your organization that you might suggest for others?
We typically try to have almost like co-facilitators, people who aren't actually facilitating, but they're there to be able to spot blind spots or issues that aren't being maybe noted by myself or whoever's facilitating. So having like a debrief with them and talk about the dynamics, how it went, who was quiet, who was not quiet, who, just all of those kind of interactions. I think it really enables those kind of folks in the future, when they're going solo facilitating, that they've got a much better kind of grasp and handle on how that session's going to go, just knowing what to kind of look for.
And kind of any final thoughts or suggestions when you think about facilitation in the context of all the CII workshops that really require it?
I think it's just, I think it's important as an organization, you identify how critical it is to have a facilitator, and for it to not be handed off to, a project team necessarily to just kind of run through themselves. I know that we've had a couple instances where people wanted to just run through that construction readiness assessment thinking, oh, it's just a checklist, I'll just say yes or no. And, then you get a result back that's far offline from what your kind of standard, if you take standard deviation, the scores really not in line with where you typically are. Kind of same with a PDRI. And so you want to make sure that having that facilitator that's kind of unbiased is really important to be able to give you a true view of, the status of, where that project proposal's at.
Oh, that's great. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to join us here, Sean, and we really appreciate your input.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
I really like Sean's practical suggestions for facilitators. First one, grow through practice. And Sean really echoed Ruth's points. As much as you can learn about facilitating, you grow through practice. Like this point on co-facilitators. It's a great way to learn a CII process like PDRI or construction readiness, as well as knowing what to watch for and the facilitation techniques to use. And finally, his comments on neutrality. Facilitators balance our predisposition to want to present the answers and reflect progress in a good light. Our final panelist that we have here today, and I might just give Jenny a second to share the slides there. Okay, our final panelist is Jason Hetherington from Archer Daniel Midland, and he introduces the practice of facilitative leadership in project management. A growing number of organizations are changing how they develop project managers. They're training as experts in project management process to lead a cross-functional team of subject matter experts who are responsible for our technical and commercial decision-making. Facilitative skills become a core competency to ensure strong collaboration and stakeholder engagement together to build consensus and buy-in. It's my pleasure to introduce Jason Hetherington, Director of Global Capital Project Management with Archer Daniel Midland's CapEx Center of Excellence. Jason, perhaps you could start us off with a bit of background on your role with ADM's Capital Center of Excellence.
Yes, thank you, Sandra. Basically, I've been with ADM now just over 25 years. Majority of that time in capital projects, anywhere from project manager to my current position. Really in ADM today in the CapEx COE, which we've stood up in the last 3 years. My role in that has been really around the FEL, our capital projects process we call the FEL, and really designing and making that a business process, because our past has been more siloed, right? And do what you think's best to get it done, right? And we went to improve results and meeting business expectations. We wanted to put in a formal process, which most companies nowadays have, right? So that's been our journey, and we're still early in that maturity, but we've definitely started seeing the benefits from a more structured process and a more involved process versus doing it yourself.
Very good. Well, maybe when you think about the capital project management process that you've been working on standardizing, you said over the last 3 years or so, where have you integrated facilitators, or where has that become essential for ADM?
Well, in a few different ways. First, I'll talk about the capital project COE, and then I'll maybe get into more of the larger organization. But first, most of all, obviously, going to one process that we really have to involve the necessary stakeholders again throughout the organization. And we've done that two ways we've done that specifically is one, we've had kickoff meetings in our first 3 phases of the FEL, which is common to pretty much everybody probably on the phone here or on the call here, that we have to make sure that we have the right ownership, we have the right responsibility, the right accountability set up early on, right? Because those are going to be the key decision makers, right? Bringing in the requirements of the project, making sure that we've met those requirements, and then also how do we manage that change, through the process, because things do change from day 1 to day, 1,000, whatever, right? So that stakeholder engagement at beginning of FEL1, beginning of FEL2, beginning of FEL3 to make sure that everybody's aligned, and we bring on the necessary stakeholders for more technical stuff and maybe FEL2 or FEL3, because that's where we get into that part, maybe less commercial once you get into a defined scope and business case, right? So really understanding what each one of those stakeholders bring to the table, what we require of them, right, and be able to communicate that clearly, but also understand that some of the stakeholders that, you know, we just have to maintain informed, right, of changes, like, again, maybe commercial, not so much later on, but they at least have to know, and they may bring in additional requirements, right? So again, that change management. And then finally, having the executive sponsor being a key person in the business, that they can make the proper decision, say, hey, we want a scope change, or this, you know, someone's slowing the process down, be able to engage someone to escalate when we have a blocker, right? And they understand what their role in that is, not only to defend the business case and the project, but also they can help remove blockers, right? That's key to that. The second part that we have is really around a peer review, you know, so, you know, in FEL 1, we do a business case review, and in FEL 2, we do a minimum technical solution review, and then FEL 3, we do a design review and execution strategy review, right? And so this is a cross-functional team that's able to bring in the key stakeholders for us to measure our readiness, right, at each one of those gates, right? And that's key, because again, making sure that we're driving to the right solution for ADM and not have to go back and re-engineer or redesign or you know, start over the process creates a lot of churn, because everything today is time to market, right, for us. So that's some of the key examples of understanding who needs to be in the room, how to talk at the different levels, how to get what you want, but at the same time communicate clearly with those stakeholders so they understand their importance in the process as well.
Okay. Well, it's pretty clear you've kind of taken that facilitative leadership and made it a pretty integral part of building out your process. Do you have any suggestions or strategies that have proven to be most successful to help build that facilitation capacity that you could share with our webinar participants?
First is get a cross-functional team, be it in the, you know, from the engineering standpoint, to understand what the experience of the different, what their experiences are, right? Because everybody comes from a different path. You don't want everybody thinking the same way, right? Because lots of new things out there, a lot of technology, a lot of better ways of doing things, right? No one knows everything, right? So just having in the beginning, here's what we want to solve for. What is the problem we're solving for, right? And what's the least rigor we need to get there, right? And we come with that collaboration just more from the technical standpoint. And then two is the other key part that was very helpful for us is we stood up in the organization along with our COE, several other COEs, right? So in the old days, we would be, the project manager would make most of the decisions himself, right, or herself. And so the stakeholders weren't as important. Well, today, we're really more the facilitator as project manager, because, you know, like the process design will be defined by the technology COE. The electrical definition will come from the electrical COE. So you're really making sure you're controlling the plane, but you depend on the other people there to make sure that the standards and the specifications are right, get their approvals on drawings and stuff. And so the project manager has gone from that central decision-making body to really the facilitator, making sure that the project is delivering on schedule and budget and quality and so on and so forth, safety and such. So, you know, having that ability of a racy, you know, I'll say a racy between the organization, saying, okay, what are you accountable for? What are you responsible for? What are you consulted for? And so on and so forth. So they have clear roles in the project organization and the project development. Otherwise, it turns into a mess. And then obviously the other part of that is when we pulverize that decision making, we're also helping to train those people that in the old days wasn't making that decision. Now they have to make that decision, right? So you have to work with them they have to understand that what do you really need? What am I really approving here? So on and so forth. So again, trying to keep the project moving along, right? And doing it right, which is most important. So.
Oh, that's great. Well, thank you so much for sharing with us today, Jason.
Yeah, thank you, Sandra.
All right, reflecting on Jason's journey, we've got some valuable takeaways. First is facilitative leadership. For a project manager, Jason shared that this means transitioning from being that central decision maker to being a leader of a cross-functional team of decision makers. He also touched on stakeholder engagement, and a facilitative leader needs to understand each stakeholder's experience, their strengths, and help them to communicate effectively with other team members. And the final I took away was technical collaboration. There are a lot of new technologies, better ways of doing things, and no one knows everything. A facilitative leader is key to supporting collaboration among our subject matter experts. Thank you, Jenny. So let's transition to our final topic on building facilitation capacity. I've got a quick poll for you, and I would like to pose and get your input on what are the biggest barriers for new facilitators. A few we've got out here, is it about knowledge of a specific workshop process or the how it should be done? Does it relate to the knowledge of core facilitation skills and techniques? Is there some fear or anxiety behind it? Are there not enough opportunities to practice? Maybe it's just the time commitment. And if we don't have the biggest reason here, feel free to put that into the Q&A, and we'd love to get your input.
Wonderful. We are still getting some votes coming in. We're about halfway there.
Okay.
Looks like we're kind of in the lead with knowledge of core facilitation skills and techniques.
Okay.
Followed by opportunities to practice. And I think third is fear or anxiety.
Okay. Well, hopefully our panelists have put some good ideas out there. So a few thoughts. So our group of panelists have shared some tremendous insights on strategies that are working well to help them today in building facilitation capacity. And the first I want to touch on is training and ensuring you provide your facilitators or facilitative leaders with training on core facilitation skills and how to facilitate specific types of workshops. It's essential. The second part of it is practice. Back to our poll. Both Ruth and Sean emphasized that a new facilitator is going to grow the most through practice. We also have kind of the fear, and that can be a pretty big barrier, and we have to help our new facilitators overcome that. And one of the best strategies to overcome fear is a facilitator and training model, where they first serve as a co-facilitator alongside an experienced facilitator. And working as part of a two-person team, your facilitator in training learns in a safer environment, and they can start to feel comfortable and get close to the action, but they still get to debrief with the facilitator on the process, how the group dynamics unfolded, and the facilitation techniques that were actually used. After a few workshops, your facilitators in training will be much more comfortable to step into that facilitation role. That takes us to our third strategy around mentorship. And pairing new facilitators with a mentor is a proven strategy to support new and upcoming group of facilitators. Much of the success in facilitation goes back to planning. So clearly understanding the meeting goals and selecting the best facilitation strategy to achieve it, that's something they can work on very closely with a mentor. A good mentor will help you brainstorm on the best strategy to use, given the group dynamics, thinking about the time available, and even the complexity of the topic. The final strategy is building a community for your facilitators. We often refer to that within CII as a community of practice. Ruth shared that they have set up group touch points quarterly to help their globally dispersed facilitators share experiences and learn from each other. This can also serve as a venue to capture lessons learned, provide continuing education, or to introduce new facilitation tools and techniques. As a CII registered education provider, Valency has been a longtime provider of training courses that focused on the how to implement CII best practices, such as PDRI, construction readiness, and risk management. And all of these rely on skilled facilitators. We offer these throughout the year as virtual public courses, as well as delivering company-specific training, where we have the opportunity to tailor the content to your specific project lifecycle. A new offering that we launched earlier this year is a training course focused specifically on facilitation skills and techniques for capital project workshops. Feedback from our clients and course participants was that in addition to understanding how to execute a CII practice, our project leaders needed more training and practice on core facilitation skills and proven techniques that would help boost their effectiveness with these meetings and workshops, especially in our virtual and hybrid environments today. The result is the most interactive course we've ever launched, with half of the course time dedicated to practicing and through the application of facilitation skills and techniques in a safe environment. We include role-playing, challenging situations, and group dynamics through case studies. It includes applying divergent thinking processes, including how to lead an open discussion or structured brainstorming, and leading a group through a convergent thinking process to compare and evaluate ideas. The course is ideal for project leaders seeking to improve their effectiveness in facilitating critical meetings and workshops throughout the capital project lifecycle. And our next public offering of this course runs for 3 half-days between March 1st and 15th. We also offer this as a company-specific training course with the opportunity to tailor the case studies to those workshops or meetings that have proven to be most challenging for your project leaders. Valency is committed to enabling organizations to build facilitation capacity and improve team alignment, and a few strategies that we use in our consulting practice. The first, we do a lot of PDRI facilitation for clients where a neutral third party will be best suited. It's also a coaching opportunity for their internal facilitators in training who can work alongside our facilitator in a co-facilitator capacity. A second strategy we use in the implementation of many CII best practices is incorporating a formal mentorship program for your facilitators. One of our senior advisors serves as a mentor to those new facilitators, helping them strategize, prepare, and debrief after the workshops. And finally, we work with many clients to support their community of practice by providing periodic training, introducing the latest tools and techniques, and sharing lessons learned on the pain points that they're working through. So let's recap on what we've covered today. We set out to understand how to build facilitation capacity that will help improve team alignment in our projects. We walk through the dynamics of group decision-making and why it's rarely a straight line from idea generation to decision. We've unpacked the role of a facilitator in group decision-making processes where we engage facilitators when we suspect a group will have difficulty reaching a conclusion on their own. We've touched on both CII best practices that commonly need facilitators, as well as additional ones that our panelists have introduced. We've talked through core facilitation practices and techniques with examples of how they're applied. Our panel of industry leaders have shared valuable insights on strategies they use to build facilitation capacity. And finally, we've introduced training opportunities and hands-on learning opportunities that Valency offers to help build facilitation skills with project leaders and facilitators. And with that, I'm excited to transition us over to our question and answer period. Over to you, Jenny.
Wonderful. So if we can invite our panelists to rejoin us on camera, we will go ahead and start with our Q&A. I have a question here for Miss Ruth. You mentioned that you've worked with many conflictive situations while facilitating. What are some of the key techniques you've used to work through these?
Yes, that takes a little bit of thought and planning, but I would say the core piece of advice that I don't think people get very often is to help people, number one, start the meeting in an open state of mind and a mood of curiosity. So you can use your introduction, your core values contact, or maybe a little bit of time at the very beginning to help people start with the right state of mind. So you want people to be open and to listen to one another. So you can do that by thinking of some ways to start in a mood of curiosity, and there are different icebreakers that you can use to help that. One thing that I do that's kind of shakes people up is to have them think about someone that they currently are not fighting with and that they're fond of. And that starts to generate a mood of openness. So that's one little trick that you can try with a group. And then I'd say the second thing is to have people state their intentions. It's similar to having the objectives like Sandra was talking about, but we often don't state our intentions, and we assume other people's intentions. So it's really good to have everyone state their intentions. And that's a little trick that you don't hear of frequently.
Thank you. Wonderful. I also have now a question for Sean. Sean, what roles make for good internal facilitators?
Well, I know for us, I think someone that's got a broad experience of different functional areas across the business, within projects, simply because it's depending on the type of facilitation, for us, Peter, I, or CRA, they touch all these different areas. So someone's got a little bit of experience with the individuals who are kind of have oversight of those areas, and have kind of some kind of relationship with them, and just some background information on how those functional areas execute. I think that's kind of important, because it kind of helps you eliminate blind spots, right? You've got a little bit of background, when they start answering questions, where they're coming from, generally how they operate, and I think that helps a lot.
Great, thank you. Okay, and a question for Jason. A lot of project managers come from engineering backgrounds. So how do you help them to take a back seat when working with other subject matter experts on a project?
Well, first thing I do is, depends if I know the group coming in or not. So usually if I know the players in the room, right, especially if you have some of your more voiceful or more aggressive people in the room, right, you may want to have some one-on-one before the meeting to just align with them and just say, hey, we know your strong opinion or whatever, but you'll be honest and open, but we want to make this a collaborative effort. If I don't know the group, then, and I've seen this done well, I'm not saying it's me, but I've seen it done well where the person works the room, right? And maybe at the first break, they go and they find out the people that maybe have been a little bit more vociferous, let's say, and made it call them down. Or the other side of that is talk to some of them that have been quiet, right? And then that one-on-one setting, right in the break or whatever, out in the hall, so that you can get them to encourage them to be more open, right? So you got to play the room a little bit, right? Know your players and either adjust beforehand or adjust on the run.
Oh, that makes sense. Okay, I have a couple here from an attendee, Tim Podesta. The first one is great point by Ruth on being flexible. What specific example would you or Sandra or other panel members give for that point? Anyone have an example on being flexible while facilitating?
I have a war story.
Okay.
I was in a group where I wasn't expecting it, and people would not give up their ideas, so there was no ability to converge, and that really threw me for a loop. And so we had to call a timeout, and I had to huddle with a group of people, and we had to come up with some other way, because people were not willing to converge. So I guess the answer there is to always have a friend and then expect the unexpected. And based on the group, then you have to kind of come up with some type of way to get people to move off dead center, or provide a some mechanism to make a decision.
Mm-hmm.
That was scary, because there were like I don't know, there was probably 75 people. It can be very intimidating.
That's actually a nice lead into Tim's next question. It's about size of meetings. He says he sees the value of co-facilitators, particularly for big meetings. What would a break point be for size to not have a co-facilitator? 6 or 8? What would you suggest? And would you, as an alternative, could you have somebody in the room kind of off to the side, keeping an eye on the time and prompting people if something might be missed? So related to size, do you have any recommendations on when you would need a co-facilitator versus just one person? Or is that always valuable to have?
Well, I think there's a few different roles there that you want to have in your facilitator, in your meeting. Is one, you try to put someone in as the contrarian, right? Because you don't want everybody thinking the same way, so you want someone to always challenge things, right? And there's some people that do that very well, right? Second part is the note taker, right? Because there's some things that may come up as a good topic, but is off scope for this meeting, so you want to take that offline, right? And then I think from the co-facilitator, I think it's always good to have a friend in the room, right? Especially, you usually have an ally one way or another in the room, but it also might be the training objective too. If you want to prepare someone, I would have the co-facilitator, even if it was a small group, because you just give them more experience of seeing that conflict resolution in action, right? Because I think that's one of the key things of fear in the room, is when you have to take a bunch of aggressive attitudes or a good discussion, right, and drive it to finality. So that'd be my suggestion.
Great. Anybody else? Okay, I have a good question here about COVID and virtual meetings. With COVID impacts on the ability to have in-person meetings, what recommendations do you have to help maximize value from virtual meeting facilitation?
I could maybe just give a couple that we found to be really helpful. And I'd say it took probably 6 months till people got to the comfort level. I always like to have a workshop where we start with the cameras on, everybody can do introductions just like we would at an in-person meeting. And even if it's not practical given the group size for everyone to have cameras on, if you've got a group of 20, I know it's distracting and I know it's challenging, but we still want to be able to you still want to know who's here and to have that personal feel. So that's one that I really like to make sure we do.
Great. I have a wonderful question here. Is a strong familiarity with the topic of discussion needed to facilitate? Kind of links back to one of the polls on the barriers. Is that a barrier to not have a deep or strong familiarity with the topic?
I know for me, the more that I have been familiar, particularly when it comes to PDRIs, knowing the kind of project or proposals that we're going to tackle, the easier it kind of is, because one of the issues, one of the things that having perform multiple PDRIs provides is this idea of identifying these repeat trends. And so having seen us perform so many PDRIs of the same type over and over again, having that experience of knowing what some of our low definition elements are, or some of our common issues are, it's easy for me when we go into one and we get to one of those elements for discussion, and all of a sudden there's a silence about an issue that happens over and over and over again. I've got that experience behind me in my pocket that I can pull out and say, well, hey, in the last 5 that we've done like this has been a common, issue. Do you guys see anything there? Is it an issue? And sometimes that ends up being, a kind of a trigger, to get discussion talking about something that maybe hasn't been previously brought up.
Yeah, good point, Sean. I think the one thing I would add is the only problem if you know too much is you got to maintain your facilitator role and not become part of the decision making, right? That's the only thing you have to be careful with. But totally agree with what Sean mentioned on the PDRIs and others.
Well, we have about 1 minute left here. I'm going to take one more question, and then if anyone posed a question and didn't get a response live today, we will circle back with you via email. We have all of your questions here. This one comes in from the Department of State. It's a great question. How do you help an organization move towards facilitative leadership instead of the solo decision maker model?
Well, that one's tailor-made for Jason.
That, in our experience, is just rip the scab off and it's going to hurt. I mean, it's a pretty significant change probably to the organization. So, you got to have a good plan for that, right? Good clarity on the process, right? But you just have to really have to turn the switch and say, yeah, we're going to move to that. I mean, it was what we went through with our COEs of pulverizing that decision making, and we're better for it. You're getting the right people to drive the best result for ADM, right? Or for our company, right? So, so prepare, but just do it.
Wonderful. Okay, I said one more, but I lied. One more. Okay, I found one more really good one. Should you excuse a facilitation role if you have a bias on the workshop topic?
Yes.
Yes, okay. I wanted to
yes.
clarify. Okay. Well, I thank each of you for joining us today. I thank our panelists for your time, your leadership, and sharing your experience. We will have a recording of this webinar available later this week, and we will send that out to all of the attendees. Again, thank you for joining. Thank you, Sandra, for hosting, and we hope to see you at our next CII webinar. Thank you all.
Great.
Have a great day.
Thank you, Jenny. Thank you, everybody.
Take care. Bye, everyone.